Once upon a time, there was an objectionable old woman. You know the kind, always wanting to get her own way, always swearing and cursing at people if they put her down or think that they're better than others. You know the kind, the type of old woman who would walk down the middle of the high street and not get out of the carriages of the lairds and ladies who thought that they were better than everybody else. The type of old woman that when she went to the baker, she expected to be getting served in her turn, not somebody else's. The type of objectionable old woman who spoke her mind. Can you imagine speaking your mind when you're old and you're a woman? No, it wasn't good. Anyway, this particular old woman, Meggie Cowie, she lived in the borough of Montrose, on the edge of the North Sea and behind the Montrose Basin, that perfect circular estuary that flows from the South Esk all the way out to the sea with mudflats that are rich with wildlife, cockles, mussels, the seabirds that came, the geese that came to land on them. It was a rich and diverse place, and it was big. It was big and it was full of rich sediment. And one day, the landowner decided that maybe if they drained the estuary, if they managed to put a dike across the mudflats, that would be an extra 2,000 acres of farmland that you could make a profit from. I mean, what was the profit in a bit of mudflats after all? And so they got a Dutch designer to come over, an architect famed for building some of the most intricate dikes in the world. And he came up with a plan. They were going to drain the basin. They were going to leave a little channel for the river to get out to the sea, and that was all. Now, the local folk didn't like it. The local folk were not impressed at all. I mean, the basin. The geese came down in their tens of thousands and they made your heart soar to see them. The basin, where the salmon would migrate, the fry coming down and sitting as smolts and getting used to the salt water before entering the sea. And then when they returned, the run of salmon that you got coming up through the estuary, and the mussels and the cockles and all the wildlife. I mean, the basin was... it was a place of magic. Surely, you couldn't drain it. You couldn't change the landscape that much. But oh no, the landowners decided that they were going to drain that basin, whether the local folk liked it or not. And one of the biggest objectors was Meggie Cowie. She'd swear at the workmen as she'd went past. She'd swear at them even more when they were in town, pushing their weight around and thinking they were better than others. One night, the dike had the pillars posted into the mud here and there. They were building the wall up all along the edge. It wasn't any use. The people were worried. The fishermen had held a protest, but nobody could do anything about it because the landowners, they ignored the local folk. Meggie Cowie went out one night. There was a storm brewing, a wild, black, dark storm with clouds that were thick and heavy and low over the sea. She went out. She went out with her stick and she poked at the dike. She poked at the dike and she muttered, and then she bent down and she took out her finger and poked it in a hole, seeing how sturdy it was, muttering under her breath all the time. Who did these people think they were? She cursed them. She cursed them, and as the rains lashed down and the wind whipped through the grass, she turned and she went back to her cottage and she sat and she wondered what the world was coming to when people could just decide to disrupt nature any way they wanted for profit. That night, the storm raged and raged and raged all night long. And in the morning, when the townsfolk got up, the dike had collapsed. It had been washed away. It had been nothing nothing to be able to withstand the forces of nature. And the townspeople celebrated, and none of them celebrated more than Meggie Cowie. Oh, she was delighted that their plans were foiled. But one of the workmen, who she'd cursed only a couple of days before, said that he had seen her. He'd seen her that night go out and stick her finger in the dike and mutter words, mutter magic words, and he didn't know what they were or what they meant. And then the winds had whipped up and the dike had been blown down, and clearly she was a witch. Witch, witch, and the cry went up that Meggie Cowie was a witch. Now, she was one of those folk that didn't make friends easily. I mean, folk respected her, but nobody was going to stand up for her. And soon she was put on trial. And folk, well, they were glad that the dike had gone, and they were not very happy about Meggie being tried, but what could you do? And the magistrate, who happened to be a friend of the landowner, well, he found her guilty. He found her guilty, and she was dragged out into the town square, and there was a pillar. And underneath the pillar they brought firewood, and they tied her to this post, and they set fire to the wood underneath. And as she burned, Meggie cursed them all and swore that no matter how hard they tried, they could never overcome the forces of nature. Meggie Cowie died. She died surrounded by flames, in pain and agony, screaming in pain. And the townsfolk, well, she was the last witch to ever be tried in Montrose. After that, nobody had the stomach for it anymore. And they never did build that dike. And the basin, as much as it is, much today as it was then, you can still see the remains of the dike though. Droner's Dyke it's cried. You can go out and you can have a look at where they tried to tame the mudflats, to tame nature, and they failed. And maybe Meggie Cowie was a witch, but maybe it was the other people who should not have meddled with nature that were the evil ones.